Hi, it's Patrick. In this video I'm going to talk about the Netiquette Project and show you how to create something similar to this. Netiquette refers to the appropriate ways to communicate with electronic communication. Now that can be something as simple as email, or it can mean something like how to appropriately use social media. So for this project you're going to basically create something related to Netiquette. Now this could be something as basic as, emailing 101 for students, teachers, parents, you name it, or it could be something about social media. You can really take this concept of Netiquette and appropriate ways to communicate online in any kind of direction you want. We're also going to focus a little on typography because there are a lot of things that you can do with font, both to add contrast as well as to improve readability. Many people believe that sans serif fonts, that is fonts such as Arial, are easier to read on a screen than serif fonts such as Times. So it's important that you use these fonts appropriately. Sometimes someone might use a serif font for headings, but for long bits of body text, common practice is to use a sans serif font. So before you jump into Dreamweaver, you're going to want to spend some time thinking about what you want to focus your project on, what aspect of Netiquette, and then with that, spend some time researching it, writing up your content. Take some time to look at the teacher's example, some of the student examples in Moodle, as well as the rubric, just so you don't miss any key aspects of this assignment. But once you have all that information ready, jump into Dreamweaver. So we previously created the plain 502 page and the 502 page. We're going to now create a new file. Go to New, make sure HTML5 is selected, and I'm going to save this as Netiquette. I'm going to save it in my 502 folder. So you should be paying attention as you move along to your file and folder structure. So if I look at my 502 folder, I can see that I now have 3 HTML files. My images folder, I have 4 images, and so far I have 1 CSS file. So I'm going to go down to the Properties Inspector and I'm going to add a document title. So now I'm going to go back to the example in this case because I want to right click and just kind of take a look at the source code and see what's happening here. And so in this example, there's basically a div container, there's a header tag, there's an aside tag, that's this callout box, there's a section tag and a footer tag. So I'm going to create something similar to that. So I'm going to make sure I have my insert panel and I'm going to go split view. Create a div ID container. I'm going to create a header, an aside tag, a section tag. I'm putting my cursor after this each time, and a footer tag. I'm now going to get rid of some of this. Before I move on, I'm going to look at my code and make sure everything looks right. Basically have a div container with my structure tags. Looks good. I'm going to save this. So now I have all my content ready, so I'm just going to copy all of this. If you have written this ahead of time in Microsoft Word, you could do the same. I'm going to go to Text Edit. I'm going to make sure I have plain text selected, and I'm going to copy this. In footer, I'm going to add a copyright character. So now that I have all my content in, I'm going to add some headings. And as always, I can notice that copying and pasting, Dreamweaver made some errors. add some H2s. And then I'm going to add these as H3s. So you notice in the example there's also a couple things bold, because you can apply contrast in other ways besides just using heading tags. I want to be consistent. I have a semicolon there. I want to add one here. Then I'm going to make each of these an ordered list. So in the Properties Inspector down here, you'll see that. I'm going to make sure that these are each their own list item. So I'm going to save all. I'm going to preview. So just like that, I have all the content for my Netiquette project. Now I'm going to add some styles. So one of the things you can do along the way, you can always go ahead and validate your code to see if you have any problems before you add any CSS. So I can see that I do have some problems on line 42. So there's this closing paragraph tag that's within here that it doesn't like, because this really should just be an H2 tag. So this is just something that happened by copying and pasting. So I'm going to save and revalidate. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to drag this over a little. I'm going to open my windows. I'm going to make sure CSS Designer is open. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a style sheet called Netiquette. So I'm going to hit +, create. I'm going to browse to my styles folder. As always, make sure that you name your files lowercase with no spaces. So while you don't want to create your page to look exactly like this, it's often helpful to right-click and look at the source code, and specifically in this case the CSS. So you can see that focuses on the container, the body tag, the side tag. That's what allows it to float to the right like that. Some header tags, and some other HTML, and then a class. So we're going to do something just like that now. As you become more proficient creating web pages throughout the semester, I'm going to go through certain key things even faster, because I'm going to assume that you already know how to do some of this. I'm going to click Container, make sure Netiquette selected, click +. And go down here, and for the container I'm going to start with my width. I'm going to do 960 fixed width. Later on this semester, when we start getting this specifically responsive design and mobile sites, we're going to approach width a different way. The nice thing about using a fixed width is you can control the line length. That is something that influences how fast people read online. I'm going to go down and I'm going to give an auto left and an auto right margin. That's going to center the div. I'm going to add a background color. I'm going to set the base font at 100%. And I'm going to do a line height. This just helps improve readability, which has something to do with typography and font. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add padding 10 pixels all the way around. I'm just using the tab to go from one to the other. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my body tag. Sometimes I'll start with my body tag before my container. I'm going to start with a background color. And then I'm going to do a font family for the site. So I'm going to start with the default font. We'll go with this Gotham. In this case, I'm going to double click and I'm just going to set Helvetica as the first. So that's a nice sans serif font to use. Okay, so I'm going to go to a side tag and I'm going to make sure Netiquette +. set this as 300 pixels. I'll float it to the right, and I'm going to give 5 pixels of padding. Okay, so now if I look at this, I'll notice that there's a different amount of margin up top and the side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to margin. I'm going to add 10 pixels up top, 10 at the bottom, but I'm only going to add 5 on the sides. Go down to font size. I'm going to make it a little smaller. And then if you look at the border, there's a border, but it's thicker at the top and bottom just for an effect. So I'm going to scroll down to border, and you notice that it gives you the option for top, bottom differently. So I'm going to click on top. So I'm going to go thick, solid, and add a color. I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom. For the sides, I'm going to make it thin, but everything else the same. So I'm going to save this and I'm going to preview it. The example has a different background color, so I'm going to go ahead and add that. But so far it's looking good. Go over here, click on a side here, and add my background color. Now I'm going to focus on my heading. And click on H1, Netiquette. I'm going to go font family. I'm going to choose the same one, but I'm going to change this first one to Verdana because that's what I want it to be. Make my font weight bold. Font size, I'm going to do M, and this is just based on that 100% font. I'm saying I want it that much bigger than that 100%. Then I'm going to add color. And so I'm here, I'm going to click on header. So header, I'm going to add a bottom border. I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to add some margin and a padding. Just going to add 5 pixels at the top. At the bottom, and then I'm going to add 8 pixels of padding. Okay, so you can see I just added that bottom border. I added some margin above here and some padding, right in there. So that looks good. I'm going to now jump to my H2. Now you'll notice that there's the same amount of white space above and below it. The design principle of proximity says that we actually want to decrease this white space between the header and the text that follows to visually show that it's a chunk of information. So I'm going to click on H2, click the plus sign, and this is where font family, I could go with the serif font for my heading if I wanted to kind of have that effect. I'm going to add a color, often changing the color and font type as well as font size can help with headings to differentiate and really kind of add that contrast. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a margin of 0 at the bottom. I'm going to make sure I still have that selected. Okay, you notice though it didn't do much there, but that's because I have to actually also go to my paragraph tag and I'm going to make sure I have that selected. And I'm going to put that atop margin of 0. And you see how that did it? You can still add a little bit of white space, right? So that's 3 pixels. That works a little better. So let's save this and let's preview it. It's looking pretty good. We need to do something down here with the footer, but if I compare it, and we need to add a class to make the learner description, but other than that I think it's looking pretty good. Okay, so let's go down to footer, click on footer, click the plus sign, and make it less specific, and I'm going to go to font size, I'll go to M and I'll do 0.7, and then I'm going to do text align. It's one of the only times I recommend centering text. And then I'm going to go up and we're going to do the class. So the class, if you remember, use an ID if you're going to do something once. Use a class if you're going to do something more than once. But you'll find that people generally use classes more than IDs nowadays. So we're going to create a class for this learner description and make it red. So I'm going to click Netiquette. I'm going to click the plus sign, and this I'm going to type in learner with a period, no space, all lowercase. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here to text, and sometimes just changing the color or even the font size a little can help draw the user's eyes and focus on that learner description. You might find other assignments that by having a clear title or a clear subheading, or even sometimes by just having clear directions, that you might not actually need a specific learner description stated. Okay, so now that I've created it, and if you remember, I should be able to go to my CSS and see it down here. But now what I want to do is I want to highlight down here under CSS. I want to go down and select learner. Now another way that you can do that, so I'm going to undo that, is if I'm in split view, if I'm in HTML view, I can go over here to learner, and if I go to this paragraph tag, I can type in class, and then if I hit return, I can see learner comes up, and just like that, did the same thing. So I'm going to save all, and I'm going to do two things. One is I'm going to go to commands. I'm going to check my spelling. I'm not going to actually go through this right now, but I want to make sure that you understand you always want to do that. I can also clean up my HTML and see if any errors come up. Nothing does. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to validate it before I upload it. No errors, that looks great. So the last two steps would be to validate the code online and to add the badges. So in this case, if you remember, I'm just going to add each of my HTML badges. Then I'm going to put that on a new line. I'm going to save this and I'm going to upload it. Take Netiquette, drag it over. I'm going to go over, I start with EDTECH 2. I put in my information, right? Then I remember what folder I put it in, and then I remember what I named it, and there it is. Okay, so you notice how these aren't active. So the next steps would be to validate my code, make those links active to link to the validation site, and then to post your assignment in Moodle. Thanks.